Have you ever been misunderstood, and instead of correcting it, you just went quiet? Not angry quiet, not dramatic, silent treatment, quiet, just quiet. Someone twists your words, assumes the wrong motive, misses your point completely, and you feel that familiar urge rise up, the need to explain, defend, clarify, fix it. But then something else happens. You pause, you exhale, and you think, never mind. You let them believe whatever version they want. If you've ever done that, or noticed someone who does, this isn't about weakness, shyness, or poor communication. There's a deeper psychology at play, and once you see it, you might recognize parts of yourself you've never quite named. Maybe it's you, maybe it's someone close to you, or maybe it's the quietest person in the room who actually understands the most. Let's talk about the psychology of people who stay quiet after being misunderstood. Because not all silence means the same thing. There's one type of person who goes quiet not because they have nothing to say, but because they've said it all before. You know the moment. You explain yourself carefully. You choose your words. You even soften your tone so no one feels attacked. And somehow it still gets twisted. Again. So this time, instead of repeating yourself, you stop. Not out of spite, but exhaustion. Psychologically, this is learned silence. When someone realizes that clarity doesn't always lead to understanding, they conserve energy. Their brain quietly asks, is explaining this worth the emotional cost? Often, the answer is no. If this is you, you might notice a pattern. You speak freely with people who truly listen, but with others, you give shorter answers, less detail, less access. It's not that you can't explain yourself. It's that you've learned not everyone deserves the explanation. Then there's another kind of quiet, the one rooted in emotional intelligence. This person understands something uncomfortable. Sometimes, correcting someone doesn't change their mind. It only exposes their resistance. So when they're misunderstood, they observe instead of react. They notice why the other person misunderstood them. Was it projection? Insecurity? A need to feel right? And instead of jumping in to fix the narrative, they let it play out. This kind of silence isn't passive, it's strategic. They're reading the room, measuring intent, asking themselves, do I want to be understood, or do I want peace? If you've ever stayed quiet not because you agreed, but because you saw the emotional cost of pushing back, you've been here. You weren't giving up your truth, you were choosing your battles. Another type stays quiet after being misunderstood because, deep down, they've already outgrown the conversation. You'll recognize this one if you've ever felt like you're explaining a newer version of yourself to someone who's attached to an old one. You say something that reflects growth, boundaries, clarity, self-respect, and the other person hears it through an outdated lens. They think you're being cold, or distant, or not like you used to be, and you realize they're not misunderstanding your words, they're resisting your change, so you stop explaining. Psychologically, this happens when someone no longer needs external validation to exist comfortably. They don't feel the urge to convince others of who they are becoming. They let misunderstanding sit where it lands. If that resonates, you might notice you're quieter than you used to be, not because you're shrinking, but because you're settled. You know who you are now, and you don't need consensus. But here's the twist. Some people stay quiet after being misunderstood, not because they're strong, but because they're protecting something fragile. This is the quiet of self-preservation. These are people who do care deeply how they're seen, who replay conversations later in their head, who wonder if they said too much, or too little. When they're misunderstood, silence feels safer than correction. Why? Because explaining requires vulnerability. It means opening up again. And if the last attempt went poorly, the brain remembers the emotional sting. So instead of risking it, they retreat. If this is you, your silence isn't indifference, it's caution. You may tell yourself, it's not worth it, but part of you still wishes you had been seen correctly. That doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. And then there's one final type, the most misunderstood of all, the person who stays quiet because they trust time more than words. They believe that behaviour reveals truth better than explanation ever could. So when someone gets them wrong, they don't rush to correct it. They let consistency speak. They let patterns unfold. They think, if you really know me, you'll see it eventually. This kind of silence comes from a long-term mindset. It's not about winning the moment, it's about letting reality catch up. Ironically, this is often the quietest person in the room and the most internally grounded. So if you're watching this and thinking, that's me, here's the question worth sitting with. Why do you go quiet? Is it exhaustion, wisdom, self-protection, growth, or trust? Because silence isn't empty, it's full of information. And when someone stays quiet after being misunderstood, it usually means they've already learned something about people and about themselves that words couldn't teach. So next time you notice that pause, that moment where you decide not to explain, don't rush to judge it. Ask what it's protecting, ask what it knows, and maybe ask yourself, how much of your silence is a boundary and how much is a wound? If this felt a little too familiar, you're not alone. And if you want more explorations into the quiet patterns people rarely talk about, you know where to find them. Sometimes the most revealing things are said without saying anything at all.